Oda has been hiding a huge secret right in front of us, and the anime just confirmed it. We finally got our absolute best look at the Elbaf mural on the sacred HARLEY textus. But here's where it gets insane. If you connect this animation to what Imu just dropped in chapter 1186, it completely rewrites the entire final saga. Everything Elbaf has been teasing, it all connects right here. Let's break down the truth. Imu told Loki that the plan to control the giants relies on kidnapping their children, because that's how they can leverage the entire nation. Imu justifies this by saying that history repeats itself, and that this was exactly how the giants of Elbaf were defeated during the Void Century. This whole children plotline is way more important than it seems, and it ties heavily into the mural. In one of the last anime episodes where it's finally revealed, episode 1168, we get some preliminary comments from Frankie and Ripley. Obviously, these were in the manga too, so it's completely canon, but the anime really helps give more context to everything. Ripley says that the drawings are estimated to have been made during the Void Century. Frankie notices that every single race is represented in the drawings, which strikes him as strange. And Ripley responds that indeed there were conflicts and wars between the different races. But then she adds the key phrase. She says these drawings look like simply a child's dream. Now you could easily mistake this as the dream of one specific child, but she rather means a childish fantasy, an innocent dream shared by all the kids from Elbaf. Because seeing all races united in peace and harmony, fighting for a common cause, is the kind of beautiful utopia that only the pure mind of a child could envision. In reality, the children of the Void Century were the ones who painted that mural, based on the legends they knew alongside everything that was happening around them. And this is why those lines are so crucial. If you need absolute proof that Oda is pointing us in this direction, just look at how Ripley introduces the mural to Frankie in the first place. She explicitly tells him she's taking him to see ancient children's drawings carved into the petrified bark, adding that they hold a historical value, so they are their national and cultural heritage. And right after all this, the anime dedicates several shots exclusively to showing the current children of Elbaf playing and studying in school. The children were always the key, and the fact that Imu just stated that they were used to defeat the giants during the Void Century completely confirms it. Furthermore, I'm certain Joyboy also had contact with those children, and it was because of him that they ended up painting the mural in the first place. He inspired them with his stories and his actions. The story itself is literally telling us the truth. It's not an adult's historical record. It is, and always has been, the work of the children. Although, of course, the foundation for the mural is the book itself, which is kept protected inside the library of Elbaf, the HARLEY. Thanks to the anime, we can finally get a much better look at its cover. It features that famous mysterious symbol we see everywhere, meaning a central circle surrounded by 8 smaller circles. To me, this was the emblem of the ancient kingdom, which in turn is a representation of the sun. But the intriguing part is that inside the central circle, there is an illustration of the Yggdrasil tree, or the treasure tree Adam, separating the sun from the moon. This could be an enormous clue to one of the mysteries raised by these texts. It is said that during the first and the second worlds, there were 2 entities that will never meet. However, the prophecy of the third world, which refers to what is about to happen right now, mentions that they will surely cross paths. It seems the text revolves entirely around this meeting, so it makes perfect sense to me that these 2 entities are represented right on the book's cover, the sun and the moon. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's take it step by step. Saul mentions that these texts have had many different interpretations. He explains that the sun god spoken of in the texts possesses different personalities depending on who is interpreting it. To some, he's the god of dominion. To others, he's the god of liberation. And to a third group, he's the god of destruction. The reality is that all 3 interpretations are correct. Each one simply comes from a different perspective. Thanks to the recent manga chapters, we now have a brand new insight into the god of dominion, and that is Imu's vision. We've seen a brief flashback of Imu and Joyboy, where it seems Joyboy told Imu that the most important thing of all was domination. But of course, the concept of domination as Simu understands it is probably very different from what Joyboy actually meant. For Imu, it is entirely about control, which is exactly what he's doing by crowning himself as a god. On the other hand, we have the god of liberation. This is the perspective of the allied faction, the civilians and the slaves. They all believe in the god of liberation. And finally, there is the god of destruction. This interpretation is incredibly intriguing because it can be understood in 2 or perhaps even 3 different ways. On one hand, it could be the perspective of the enemy kingdoms that allied during the Void Century to destroy the Ancient Kingdom. According to Vegapunk, this alliance viewed Joyboy as the enemy, so they would surely label him as a destructive being that needed to be eliminated. They needed a narrative for the public to justify their actions. On the other hand, we have the religious point of view. Many religions share a common element, a sort of final judgment where the world ends. For instance, in Christianity, it is said that when Jesus returns for his second coming, that end of the world will take place. If we take this to its absolute limits, it can be interpreted as Jesus or God being the very cause of the world's destruction. Obviously, Oda is drawing inspiration from this with Luffy and Nika. A sort of final judgment is going to happen, bringing a destruction of the world, but of course, so that the world can be reborn. It makes perfect sense that even though Nika is a savior god, his arrival is tied to the destruction of the world. And in a way, we can already see this on a smaller scale. Every single time Luffy has saved a country, take Dressrosa for example, what we see is that the nation is left completely destroyed. People who don't have the full context would only see that Nika arrived and left the country in ruins, overthrowing the kingdom. But the reality is that it was a purge of evil. The country is reborn through the effort of the citizens, who finally feel free. Therefore, all versions of Nika, the Dominator, the Liberator and the Destroyer, are correct. It all depends on your point of view. Saul goes on to say that the story in the book has 3 chapters, and that the third world described there is this one, the real world. This is huge. However, the anime heavily implies that the third world isn't actually represented on the mural. To show this, the episode gives us a sequence of shots that cuts back and forth between the paragraphs Robin is reading and specific sections of the mural, almost as if dropping hints about which part of the story corresponds to each drawing. The first world matches the left side, where we see the serpent, the buildings, and the people drawing energy from below. Then, the entire right side is shown while the second world is being discussed. But when Robin reads about the third world, the present day, we don't see the mural anymore. Instead, the screen cuts to Luffy and Nika. I'm sure this threw a lot of people off, especially those who were trying to divide the mural into 3 neat sections. My interpretation has always been a bit more abstract. I'm going to break it down for you exactly how I understand it today, thanks to this newer, much more complete version from the anime. Because of course, Oda purposely made it ambiguous, so that just like the characters inside the world of One Piece, we would also end up with multiple interpretations. Nothing is entirely crystal clear. The first world. Within the earth, there was a fire, and we see it represented by small flames. Keeping in mind that during Egghead we were told that fire was the ancient source of energy, what I understand here is that the planet originally possesses a natural energy source, its own natural resources. Robin then reads that mankind, succumbed to greed, touched the Forbidden Sun. To me, this means that human greed caused them to overexploit the planet's natural resources beyond its capacity. Then, enslaved prayed, and the sun god appeared. This is a direct consequence of the previous sentence. The powerful elites extracting the planet's energy were using their own power to enslave others, forcing them to work, either to extract those very resources or to build comforts for the wealthy. This forced the slaves to look for a glimmer of hope just to keep going, a belief to cling to, and that hope was the sun god. They began to believe that the sun as an entity, God himself, or a personification that would descend to earth, would be the one to liberate them. The biblical reference to Jesus descending to earth as the personification of God is crystal clear here. Robin continues reading. The earth god raged, and with its serpent of hellfire, shrouded the world in death and darkness. I have two very different interpretations for this serpent, but let's focus on the first one. The Earth God's Rage sounds entirely like divine punishment, which in turn was simply the way ancient people rationalized natural disasters, or already showed us this exact behavior in the Shandora flashback. When the earthquake hit, the Shandians believed it was because God was angry, punishing them for not sacrificing the girl and for killing Kashi, the giant snake they viewed as the embodiment of that punishing God. So what actually happened in this first world? It was a primary cataclysm caused by overexploiting the Earth's natural resources. They condemned themselves. This era is equivalent to the myths of our own world's first civilizations, eras we have barely any record of, but from which we inherited countless stories of divine cataclysms meant to purge our sins. The texts speak of gods because that's what people believed in back then. It was their only way to explain the world. And from that same desperation, the belief in a benevolent God who would save them was born. Aside from the gods of the earth, the text also mentions the serpent of hellfire. If we are arguing that everything here is a metaphor for something real, this serpent must also correspond to a destructive element from that era. And there is a clear candidate, something that giants Dory and Broggy and later Harold already referred to as a red serpent, being it the great serpent soaked in blood all the way back in Leto Garden, the Red Line. My theory is that the Red Line was formed either as a cause or a consequence of that massive earthquake, triggered by the overexploitation of natural resources. It was like a colossal collision of tectonic plates that raised that massive circular ring across the entire planet. Naturally, the humans of that era would link that sudden chaos and destruction to the Red Line emerging right in that moment of terror. They would see it as pure evil. In their stories, it became the serpent of hellfire because it literally crawled out from beneath the earth. So yes, as of today, I firmly believed the formation of the Red Line was the definitive event that destroyed the First World, leaving the planet completely fractured and isolated. And of course, the Grand Line would be a direct geographical consequence of the Red Line itself. The text of the First World concludes with this line, "and they will never meet." To me, this hints exactly at what I just described, the world becoming entirely isolated. But there are more interpretations to this, which we will discuss later. Now, let's move on to the second world. This is one that clearly represents the void century. The text says, "Within the emptiness, there was breath." This is a pretty ambiguous phrase, though I believe it could be related to souls and inherited wills due to what comes next. The forest god tamed demons. This has to be without a doubt a reference to the birth of devil fruits. As I've mentioned on many occasions, I believe they were created using the beliefs, desires and wills of the people. This means that if a belief in Nika already existed in the first world, it was now in the second world that a devil fruit materialized based on that very belief, the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, the sun god. The text continues by saying that the sun spread the fires of war. In other words, the person who ate the sun god fruit, Joyboy, ended up spreading his ideals, liberating slaves, and triggering a massive war against the oppressors. Everything makes perfect sense so far. The mystery deepens with the next lines. Those of the half moon dreamt. Those of the moon dreamt. We still don't know for sure who each group represents, and there are many theories out there. For instance, some believe the people of the half moon are the members of the D clan, since the letter D is literally shaped like a half moon. Alternatively, they could also represent the two groups of people who after the destruction of the first and second worlds were unable to meet. Continuing with the text, it says that man killed the sun and became gods. This is a direct metaphor for what actually went down. Joyboy, the sun god, was defeated by the enemy, the allied kingdoms that formed the world government and self-proclaimed themselves as gods. It then states that the sea god stormed, accompanied by an animation showing everything sinking. Here we have the description of the cataclysm that destroyed the second world. This time, it wasn't an earthquake linked to the god of earth, but a massive flood that they associated with the god of the sea. Of course, in the present day, we know what actually caused it: the use of the ancient weapons. In fact, we've already seen a small demonstration of this in the current story, with the sea levels rising by 1 meter. Vegapunk confirmed that during the Void Century the ocean rose by staggering 200 meters, causing entire continents to vanish and forcing civilizations to become isolated on separate islands. Once again, the same message appears, and they will never meet. This can be understood as the planet suffering yet another layer of isolation. In the first world, it was the formation of the Red Line, and now, in the second world, it was the world being fractured into islands. Throughout this entire explanation, the anime shows us the clash that took place where every single race participated, just as Ripley mentioned. This was the exit clash where Emu defeated Joyboy and became the king of the world. However, since history repeats itself, that same drawing also serves to represent the war that is about to break out once again in the present day. The transition to the third world features a highly intriguing detail. A stone shaped exactly like a poneglyph emerged from the water. This clearly represents the guide left behind during the Void Century, ensuring that now, in the present, people can learn what happened and complete the mission. The text reads as follows: "Within the chaos, there was a void." I'd say this refers to the fact that amidst all the chaos of past history, gaps were left behind. The government censored what happened. The inconvenient remnants recall the promised day and hear the voice of the broken moon. This is exactly what I explained before, the poneglyphs, the remnants that left a trail to trouble the authorities or create inconveniences. In other words, during the Void Century, they left the truth carved in stone. And that translates to disrupting the world government, which constantly seeks to censor everything. It says that this trail they left behind, the poneglyphs, recalls the promised day. It's worth noting that we already have a poneglyph that serves as a letter of apology from Joyboy to the mermaid princess for failing to fulfill his promise. According to the text, it is a promise of the broken moon, meaning the half moon. To me, this heavily supports the theory that the people of the half moon are indeed the Declan. Then, it continues speaking about the sun god, in this case, Luffy. He dances and laughs, guiding the world to its end. As I said at the beginning, guiding the world to its end might sound like the absolute destruction of the planet, but in reality, it is meant to bring a new morning, as the text continues saying. It is the final judgment, the Armageddon, or the Ragnarok of our own world's religions and mythologies. A cataclysm where those on the right side of the history will move forward. The text concludes by saying that on this occasion, they will surely meet. As I mentioned earlier, one option is that this refers to the unification of the world, and consequently the unification of the seas. It is clear that after the final war, we are going to have the greatest banquet in history, where everyone celebrates together as one. But there are other options on the table. For instance, the prophesied meeting between Nika and Nidhogg, or Joyboy's promise to the mermaid princess, which would allow all fishmen to share a habitat on the surface alongside humans. Some might even argue that this refers to the ultimate clash between Luffy and Blackbird, assuming that Blackbird represents the moon. However, I don't really like that option. As I explained on other occasions, to me, Blackbird represents a black hole, while the moon is actually represented by the newest member of the Gorosei, Garling. My personal bet is that it either refers to the entire world as a whole, or specifically to the people of the half moon and the moon. Now, when it comes to who the people of the moon actually are, the easy answer could be to say they are the Shandians, Skypians, Virkans, and Lunarians. But doing that would leave out all the other races, like the fishmen, the minks, and everyone else. So I don't have a definite answer just yet. I believe Oda has everything meticulously planned, and his goal right now is to keep us guessing, sparking all these different interpretations. He hasn't given us that final piece of data that would make everything click. We just can't know for sure yet. But as for everything else, I think it's pretty clear. Finally, let's look at a few prominent details on the mural. For instance, the demon depicted with a sun represents the inner demon of Imu, and what it holds in his hand is the definitive mother flame, the forbidden sun. Notice that there is absolutely no trace of Blackbird, which heavily supports the theory that he might be the ultimate final villain, the one who ends up destroying the demon inside Imu. We also see the elephant, represented Sunisha, and a dragon perched atop the tree, which should be a reference to Nidhogg. This opens up a second interpretation for the serpent, one I've already discussed in other videos, that these three beasts are the one linked to Uranus, Pluto, and Poseidon. In other words, that serpent would actually be a reference to the Sea Kings. Intriguingly, this matched the three ancestral beasts described in Judaism that are prophesied to appear at the end of the world: Leviathan, Behemoth, and Zeus. Though that's not something that matters too much for the Harley text. The ultimate conclusion is that the real focus lies within the second world, the Void Century, since that very same war is about to repeat itself right now. On the other hand, the first world is left almost as a myth. I seriously doubt we'll see a Joyboy equivalent from that era, and in fact, I doubt we'll even get a flashback of that time. The flashback will be about the Void Century, and the ones who are going to play a much bigger role than we ever anticipated are the children. The very children who painted the mural and became the targets of the world government. And honestly, I see another clear parallel here. In Big Mom's flashback, we had Mother Carmel taking care of the children of Elbaf, including orphans brought in from other nations. But of course, the ultimate ended up being controlled by the government. The fact that it was a mix of different races back then makes me think that during the Void Century, Elbaf wasn't just home to giant children, but also to kids rescued from other islands. To wrap things up, let me throw a completely wild theory your way. What if those children of different races who painted the mural, the ones Joyboy surely befriended during the Void Century, actually turned out to be the original D-Clan? The text states that the people of the Half Moon dreamed, and Ripley told us the mural looks like it came straight from a child's dream. Furthermore, let's not forget Imu's words in chapter 1171. They must never forget that Elbaf is D. It fits perfectly, especially now that Imu has doubled down on the absolute importance of children during the Void Century. And that's it for today's theory. Before we wrap things up with today's big question, I want to share something truly special with you. I'm incredibly excited about this channel, and seeing it grow means everything to me. If you're loving these deep dives, hitting that subscribe button is a huge help. But also, I have some more news. YouTube has just activated the join button for us. This is an amazing milestone for me, and if you have the means and want to support this adventure directly, becoming a member is the ultimate way to help me dedicate more time to these breakdowns. Please only do it if you can. There is absolutely no pressure at all. But if you do, it would make me really happy, and you will unlock some perks like exclusive loyalty badges, custom emotes, and the chance to get your comments pinned at the top of my videos. So let's talk about that ending. Did the theory that the original D-Clan were actually those multiracial children from the Void Century completely blow your mind? Do you believe Elbaf was operating as a hidden sanctuary for kids rescued from the world government? Or do you have another way of reading the Harley texts? Let me know your wild theories down in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one!